We typically view the Bible as a single, monolithic object. In physical reality, it is a curated anthology, a library of distinct voices collected over vast stretches of time. The Old Testament serves as the architectural bedrock of this collection, providing the historical and legal framework that supports the entire structure. This ancient scroll contains the work of dozens of authors: law, poetry, history, and prophecy, compiled over 1,000 years. These columns reflect a generational effort to preserve three core ideas: divine creation, a binding covenant, and an anticipation of a restored world. By the 1st century, this massive library of expectation had set the stage for a new narrative, centered on a specific figure in Roman Judea. In the 1st century CE, a movement emerged from these desert canyons, following a carpenter from the village of Nazareth. At the movement's start, no written records of these events existed. There were no books, only the transmission of spoken words. Stories were shared in the flickering light of oil lamps and in hidden house churches, relying entirely on the accuracy of human memory. This method faced a natural limit. As the decades passed, the eyewitnesses who had actually seen these events began to age and die. If this generation passed away before their memories were fixed in writing, the specific details of the movement's origins would be lost to history. Survival depended on a shift from oral tradition to physical media. The New Testament emerged as a series of fragmented, local documents, rather than a planned, cohesive book. The earliest texts were letters. The Apostle Paul wrote these as pastoral correspondence to small, struggling communities located in cities like Rome and Ephesus. These letters were often composed in difficult conditions, drafted in prison cells or written late into the night to address immediate local crises. Between 65 and 90 CE, a second phase began as writers like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John took up the pen. They gathered the fading oral traditions, stitching them together to create the definitive biographical accounts we now call the Gospels. These letters and biographies acted as lifeboats, carrying the movement's identity out of the 1st century and into the wider Roman world. These documents were hand-copied and carried across the Mediterranean on merchant ships, stuffed into the packs of travelers and traders. Because the Roman Empire viewed the movement with suspicion, these texts were often read in secret underground gatherings. This rapid spread led to an oversaturation of material. By the 2nd century, hundreds of different texts were circulating throughout the empire. Authentic apostolic accounts were now mixed with forgeries, legends, and fringe Gnostic writings that offered conflicting versions of the story. To maintain a unified identity, early scholars had to find a way to separate historical testimony from later invention. By 397 CE, regional councils and leaders like Athanasius worked to resolve this editorial crisis. These councils functioned as auditors, applying a rigorous stress test to recognize the texts that had already proven their authority through centuries of use. The first filter, apostolic origin, accepted only texts traced directly to an eyewitness. The second, prophetic alignment, required logical consistency with ancient Hebrew scriptures. Finally, Christological focus ensured each book pointed clearly to the historical life and death of Jesus. These unified criteria successfully isolated the core records from the hundreds of competing texts. The result was the formal locking of the 27 books of the New Testament into a single, unified canon. This final consensus was only reached after centuries of debate and the physical risks of martyrdom during periods of Roman persecution. These texts traveled from the tents of Hebrew patriarchs to the prison cells of Roman apostles, woven into a single continuous narrative. By consolidating these diverse voices into a portable, standardized library, the councils ensured their survival through the fall of empires. This curation allowed the collection to be translated into thousands of languages, eventually becoming the most widely distributed library of texts in history.